11th Hour on Radio Sri Lanka illustrates the rediscovery of the glitz and the glam of the nation's most prominent entertainers and eminent personalities from the corporate sector. Join us every Monday at 11 exclusively on Radio Sri Lanka. Yet another episode on 11th Hour, and we have got an industry expert connecting with us today on 11th Hour. The CFO of the present and the future requires to be right beside the CEO of an organization, continuously assisting to navigate these risks which are witnessed in enterprises whilst constantly making the business resilient and strengthening the business model is what the CFO of the present and the future will have to work on. The level of risk and the rate at which risk is increasing is unprecedented in general in any company or in any nation, and this is why the corporate calls for highly skilled risk management processes and, as the term itself suggests, finance is certainly the available monetary totality in an organization that eventually makes them use to the said fund. CFOs can no longer simply rely on old tools and in the traditional return on a certain capital, or in other terms, the return on investment, payback period, and all the measures that CFOs are familiar with in general. This is why we are connecting with an industry expert to speak to us about the finance sector being the core of every business organization today. Good morning to you, Mr. Moiz Rehmanjee.
Good morning, Sabrina.
We are connecting with the Group CFO of Hemas Holdings PLC, Mr. Moiz Rehmanjee, with 11th Hour today. Let's get about with the questions. Chief financial officers are integral to the oversight of an organization and its financial activities. How has your past finance-related work experience well prepared you for a position such as this?
So, CFO, the role, it demands a very unique mix of the mainstream finance acumen, the business acumen, as well as leadership traits. So if I were to talk of my work experience, I've been fortunate to work several companies across diverse industries in different geographies as well, and in companies both in Sri Lanka and overseas. As a result, I've always been pushed into a situation where I need to work with the different business environment. And therefore, I've been through the mill multiple times, that whole cycle of acclimatizing myself to the different organization, familiarizing myself with the different teams, getting their buy-in, understanding the company, the business, and the industry on the run as I'm executing my role as well.
Mm-hmm. So which industry has been pleasing to you so far? Just a cross question.
I worked in so many, from apparel to consumer goods to LPG to professional services. But if I were to pick one, I would say the one that has always interested and sparked the best out of me has been consumer goods, which is interestingly where I've finally landed at also now. Being part of Hemas, it's predominantly it's a B2C business, and consumer goods is a big part of its overall portfolio. Yeah.
True enough. The role of a CFO is rapidly changing and can no longer simply rely on crunching numbers and focusing on a company's financial statements alone. Let us know more about this challenging and ever-changing role.
All right. So when you talk of finance, the mainstream verticals within finance, you have the budgeting, the planning, the analysis, the reporting, treasury. Those are the typical topics that we all hear about all the time when it comes to the finance mainstream role. But in addition to that, where a CFO comes and makes a difference is in terms of creating value for the business. Beyond just doing the back-end work, what is the additional value add that you can add to the businesses that are running? And in on that front, certain other verticals that would come under the CFO's role, such as driving mergers and acquisitions, where you have an existing business and you're looking at what new business you can acquire in the right possible way to add maximum new value to the existing businesses. Risk management, optimizing a company's capital, right, which is all about pulling out funds where you don't have the best returns and allocating them into areas where you have maximum returns, right? So that as a portfolio, you create optimum and maximum returns for the whole group. Driving culture, not something that is typically known to fall under the CFO's office, but in my view, as the famous saying goes, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So whatever rationally thought out strategy you may have, it needs to be driven by the culture. And if the CFO is supporting the CEO in achieving and realizing strategic goals, he or she needs to partner with the CEO in driving the culture also down the whole organization bloodstream. And apart from that, as like the board, like the CEO, the CFO is also in his own right, his or her own right, also an ambassador to the organization. So areas such as investor relations, the CFO has to front end it and drive that as well. So I would sum up those as some of the key additional areas where the CFO plays a role in terms of adding value beyond the mainstream functions of the typical finance role.
You have been in the industry working for multiple organizations, as you mentioned earlier, Moiz. So how do you see there are certain organizations that they believe in clinging on to their cultural systems, their usual formalities which they have been got so engrossed to? I mean, how can a CFO make a quick change in organizations like that?
Well, I think it's important to first understand why that particular organization would be holding on to its old systems and processes. Is it out of need? Or is it just a legacy that the existing shareholders or the existing board members want to hold on to as part of their comfort? It's more often than not for rational reasons. It's something much more emotional that's causing or cultural that's causing the organization to hold on to it. So whilst finance people are trained to think rationally, objectively, in a disciplined way, it's not necessary that everybody also adopts the same line of thinking in their decisions. So you need to address the softer side of it. You know, why are we holding on to these old legacy systems, processes? Are they really needed? More often than not, it's not needed. So you need to explain and articulate that to the people who are holding on to it within the organization. And most importantly, by understanding what their concerns are, what their anxieties are, offering a better alternative. So the better alternative needs to be conceived by the CFO, a more rational, a more cost-effective form of governance and systems versus the traditional over-governance, offering that alternative and selling it to the internal stakeholders who want to hold on to the legacies.
True enough indeed, yes. So CFOs will be required in today's context to shift their focus from mainstream finance towards unlocking profits, investor relations, people management, disruptive technology, and several other crucial and newly forming variables. I'm certain you would agree on this and would have a detailed viewpoint.
For sure. Now, some of the points I already touched on earlier, but if I were to add one more pillar to the whole conversation about what more the CFO should be doing outside of mainstream finance, I would bring the IT piece into that. And it's something that we talk of all the time these days. It's out there in the media as well on how IT, technology, etc. is changing not just business but also our personal lives. And we hear about it all the time. The heavyweight punchlines, the artificial intelligence, blockchains, machine learning, etc. And the obvious next question is, what does this all mean to all of us? In my view, the blunt reality is that we don't really know. None of us do. We know that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of energy around technology. But where is it all going to land? We really don't know as yet. But that doesn't mean you just ignore it or turn a deaf ear to it, right? And just wait for it to land somewhere before you adapt. You need to keep abreast of what's going on. What are the new technologies out there in Sri Lanka as well as outside of Sri Lanka that companies are adapting? What's working and what's not working, and be open to adapting it. And in there, one critical role that the CFO can play is to be a gatekeeper on not just adapting everything, because there's a tendency to get down to herd behavior. Everybody else is adapting this, so let's do it ourselves. The CFO can bring the rational hat there in terms of filtering. Here's what's out there. Here's what's the buzz. And from this whole list of things that we can adapt right now, here's what makes sense to us because it has worked in these organizations, versus, again, just getting onto that whole herd behavior and adapting what is yet not even tested and what is not even proven to be working. Yeah, but picking up on the technology pillar, the digital side, right, to add value to your organization is the other pillar that I believe the CFO can play a very critical role as well.
Comparing a company or an enterprise in Sri Lanka, and when we look at certain digital solutions and softwares, sometimes certain processes can be done within even a couple of seconds, but unfortunately, being in a country such as Sri Lanka with so much of economic turbulence and so on, do you think that we could do more, but unfortunately certain situations such as these is not giving you that edge to make a finance department even much more promising?
I would say that applies not just to finance, but across all businesses and all functions. Because last 3 years has been a roller coaster of firefighting. We had the East attacks, then we had COVID, and then, of course, last 12 months, the economic/financial crisis in Sri Lanka. So it was a case of firefighting where everybody's priorities were different, right? So in an environment such as that, investing your time, your money towards top priorities like this, it takes a back burner. Yeah, so you need to first deal with the pressing issue at hand, which in the case of Sri Lanka was pretty serious. You don't have fuel, you don't have electricity, the banks don't have the funding lines. It was a series of firefighting. So you need to deal with those. And in that, it sucks out all the time and energy from allocating to something else. So I would say now that we are hopefully with all those behind us and the worst is behind us, the companies, the businesses, including the finance folks within the businesses, can now start thinking and looking forward as to what's ahead. The worst is behind us. What can we do in the next 2-3 years? And there we can now start having serious conversations of adapting all these things that we're speaking of. But was it priority on top of the agenda in the last 12 months? The answer is no.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
How does a CFO contribute towards an organization's transformative change and driving returns to its investors?
So when you talk of transformating changes, right, you have the business changes in terms of either an acquisition or a divestment or a new product or whatever, which is another topic altogether. Yeah, but as the saying goes, the only constant is the change itself. So when you talk of change, you have, again, what I mentioned earlier, and then you have the changes within an organization, right? The internal changes. Now, the CFO is at the helm of all information and decision making within an organization. And just the same way, you have something called the World Wide Web, right? You have also something called the Internal Information Highway within an organization to which the CFO is privy. So what a CFO should do is take advantage of that, or maybe that's the wrong word. I would say leverage on that position to contribute to whatever changes that are needed in driving ultimate returns to investors and all stakeholders. That's how they should go about in terms of driving change. And there's so many different kind of changes the CFO can be a live wire within an organization.
Was there a phase where you had to initiate an organizational change, such as in the form of restructuring a certain department? If so, how was it approached and how should this be strategically carried out?
So that's the best kind of example on the kind of internal changes that you need to bring in. So when you talk of internal changes, invariably people management becomes a very critical aspect of it. Because the moment you have internal changes, there is anxiety, there is confusion, there is all those little human emotions that typically play in when you talk of a restructure. So in those situations where people management becomes a key pillar of it, a couple of things that you need to do, right? First and foremost, as a CFO, when you're driving such changes, such departmental changes or internal restructure changes, the CFO needs to be very clear on what are you trying to achieve here. What is the objective of this change? What are the timelines? What is the blueprint? What are the interdependencies with other departments, etc. The CFO has to be very clear on that. Secondly, the CFO needs to articulate all of that to the key internal stakeholders who are going to support the CFO in those kind of changes. I mean, I'm speaking based on experiences I've had in driving these kind of changes in organizations. So you got to make your story, make it clear to the CEO, make it clear to the board, and the other key stakeholders around you. Very often, HR also plays HR is a key stakeholder in this whole thing. Once you explain yourself to them, you get their buy-in, and then you start executing. Executing basically includes active communication and engagement with all the relevant team members, wherever the change is going to impact them. Being candid with them, having direct one-on-ones with them, building confidence, and with all of that, getting their buy-in, because that's most important. And when these sort of changes happen, it's a make or break situation. So in my experience, in a well executed restructure or departmental change or anything of that sort, everybody wins. But in a bad executed one, no one does. So there's a lot of people aspects to these kind of changes, and whether the CFO likes it or not, he or she needs to wear that hat as well. Whilst HR would support the CFO in that whole journey, he or she also must wear that hat and be sensitive to all the employees' expectations, anxieties, and whatever else human emotion comes along in these sort of situations.
Excluding the numbers.
Excluding the numbers, that's right.
The CFO is also an ambassador to the organization and part of the leadership team that adopts appropriate business models of the new world. What sort of local industries should be rapidly connecting with such changes to be on par with the international business models?
All right, so if Sri Lanka has learned anything in the last 24 to 36 months, to me, the most important lesson is that our businesses in general are not competitive, and hence we are significantly import dependent. Now, if you talk of all the export businesses, they've had to adapt and compete with the competition which is worldwide, and they've had to do that due to lack of choice, because unless you adapt and be competitive, you got off business. But local business, unfortunately, local industries have been protected. They've been protected, or they've not been given the space to develop because of the obvious easy option of having cheaper imports. So in my view, all local businesses need to start looking at what's out there, what businesses in those industries in other countries are doing, adapting their business models, adapting what standards those guys have established, and implementing them locally as well. Irrespective of whether there is competition or not, they need to start doing that, because we need to be less import dependent, for sure, which is what we've learned in the last few months. The role of the government is to stop protecting and subsidizing local businesses against the foreign competition, inviting foreign competition into Sri Lanka, right, in form of investments and in terms of technology and know-how transfer to the local industries. That's what the government needs to do in this whole thing. And also rationalizing. There are certain businesses that you need to start having local industries in, and there are certain businesses that you do not want to be in, even though it may be a good import substitution option from the point of view of saving forexes. Now, for example, manufacturing products which are environmental hazardous. You need to think of those industries where you don't want to do it in Sri Lanka, Right? Let those industries let those products be manufactured elsewhere. Sri Lanka can continue importing those, but more value-adding products, where Sri Lanka can play a more value-adding role, is what we need to start internally producing. And these other products which are hazardous either to people or to the environment, we can keep pushing them away from our whole manufacturing portfolio. So rationalizing what we need to manufacture and what we should just allow other countries to do and import from them is also another key role that the government should play.
Just a question though. Now there are certain product lines rather, where people are more comfortable in purchasing a world-known brand. But Sri Lanka also does have the infrastructure, the facility, and the human resources and all that. You name it, we do have all these to support the production line where we can actually duplicate a similar product line. I mean, why do you think certain organizations, some leading conglomerates, blue chip companies and so on, why aren't they attempting this? Is it because of the finance perspective?
No, I would have not think so. But if you're going to launch a product or a brand, that's going to be successful in competing against the multinational brands, it needs to come out of a lot of grit and passion, which is very personal and individual. If you got a local entrepreneur with a certain vision and passion to create a certain product or brand, he or she is going to do it. But would a conglomerate starting from shareholders to board level to leadership level have the same kind of appetite and interest? Practically no. Because, you're running a whole portfolio in so many different industries and big businesses. Are you going to be able to pay attention to this small single product or single brand and make it internationally competitive? Most likely not. But you'll have all these little small businesses, all these little small entrepreneurs who will have those ideas, who will have the passion, who will have the formulation, right? Who will have a certain vision. And we know some of those products and brands in Sri Lanka which have come up over the years.
Pretty much successfully.
Very successfully, and they're exporting successfully as well. In fact, recently we've seen tweets of certain global celebrities carrying some of those products in their handbags. Yeah?
Rightly said, yes.
So what is needed is an ecosystem within Sri Lanka as a country that fosters that kind of entrepreneurship. So from financing to management development, nurseries that facilitate new businesses to come up, access to R&D, access to local expertise, the students from universities who can contribute towards those kind of business versus migrating, educating those entrepreneurs to also get on the global network, onto social media, to get ideas from all over and not just be entirely dependent on what they conceive. Yeah, I think it's about creating that whole ecosystem and allowing all those multiple hundreds of little entrepreneurs to actually come up versus depending only on the big boys to create and launch new products.
Certainly. Data, analytics and intel are amongst the crucial pillars to businesses, not just in terms of finding new markets and business segments for revenue generation, but also for understanding, variabilizing and controlling costs. What's your viewpoint regarding this, please?
It's interesting. As businesses grow, they become more complex. Simple rule of thumb. Why is that? Because customers become more complex. Their expectations become more complex. Supply chains become more complex, as we have seen in the last post-COVID. When people were suddenly questioning, the global supply chains and too much dependencies on certain geographies or certain countries, certain geographies or certain companies. And sadly, you have geopolitics at play. And the geopolitics also has its interconnections with all these complex supply chains, which simply adds to the complexity. And the world of finance and money is no different. Whatever decision or guidance the Fed gives in the US every quarter, every month, that ultimately impacts interest rates, and it impacts the availability of dollars across the world, and hence it has a big impact on little countries such as Sri Lanka. So the complexity is just part of globalization, it's part of growing big, which is all around us. You can't escape from it. Now, in the world of complexity, how can you be responsive and how can the CFO contribute to that? Number one, you need to have fast responsive MISs within an organization that quickly give the information that enables the decision makers within to take the right decisions. You need to have a culture of fact-based and information-based decision making within the organization. The leadership, including the CFO, should be up to speed with the news, with what's going on, which means early to rise and getting updated with the overnight news that you just missed out on in the last few hours. Keeping abreast and updated with the journals, with the news, with the reading, which is all out there. The information is available. So you need to keep updated, keep abreast with all of these things, and therefore be able to see what are the changes that are happening that could invariably impact you, and hence be faster responsive to all of that. It's about creating that intel, in summary, the intel outside of just the internal numbers, information that is out there in your own internal MIS, the intel that you create around you amongst the leadership of an organization, which includes a CFO. And that's how a CFO can contribute towards being fast responsive to all these complexities and changes all around us.
Whilst business risks always exist, what are the financial risks that the CFO should be monitoring, and what are the related risk mitigation and compliance frameworks that he or she should be owning?
So if I were to piggyback on what I just mentioned earlier to your previous question, now as an example, right, if we talk of the financial crisis in Sri Lanka in the last couple of months, arguably Sri Lanka was merely the first domino to fall in the face of a global debt or financial crisis. So there are a lot of more countries who are also vulnerable, but Sri Lanka, unfortunately, was just the first domino to be impacted by this whole thing. I mentioned supply chains earlier, right? So when you talk of global supply chains, the risks around the supply chains are also more complex, and these risks need to be factored into things such as your insurance contracts, which the CFO is a custodian to. When you're working globally, with operations all over the world, you're also depending on free trade agreements with other countries. And terms and conditions of free trade agreements tend to change as the political environment changes. So these are all among some of the few typical risks, right, that comes directly under the purview of the CFO. Sorry, I mentioned one. I forgot to mention one important one, which is the taxation policy of a government, which is the buzz in Sri Lanka right now with the significant changes that took place in the last few months with the last budget proposal. So that also, these are all typical risks that come under the CFO's purview. So what should the CFO do in managing such risks? Right? It's all about taking stock of all these risks, creating a tracker around them within the organization. That these are all the risks that we have in force, which are impacting us, the risks that are in play. What are the risk mitigation strategies that we have to overcome these risks, and who are the custodians within the organization of each of these risk mitigation strategies, and a continuous follow-up and update on how we're progressing against each one of these. So it's basically in simple terms as something what we call a risk register. Right, so a CFO has a key role also in making sure that risk register plays in well in supporting the organization. So here are the risks that come typically under the CFO's purview. These are the risk mitigations that we're going to do against these. These are the custodians within the organization who are going to drive these risk mitigation strategies, and constantly following up, tracking them, and making sure that those strategies are executed to manage those risks.
I think that's exactly why we made sure to invite the right guest today to 11th Hour to speak about how well an industry expert can handle this risk register in the most accurate manner. So it's been given to understand that liquid money is important to run the operations of an organization, right from the smallest spending to huge business expenses. Finance is a necessity. Businesses today are extremely fragile, which is a point where many would agree. Only when you add proper management tools and the skillful staff to the field of finance, the company can reap its benefits. We were in conversation today with Mr. Moiz Rehmanjee, Group CFO of Hemas Holdings PLC. Thank you so much for connecting with the 11th Hour.
Thanks, Sabrina. Thanks a lot. Been a pleasure.
I'm Sabrina Zawahir signing off from 11th Hour. 11th Hour on Radio Sri Lanka illustrates the rediscovery of the glitz and the glam of the nation's most prominent entertainers and eminent personalities from the corporate sector. Join us every Monday at 11 exclusively on Radio Sri Lanka.